Welcome to Direction Northeast. Hello, I'm Madison Phillips. This program is a presentation of the Communications Department of Northeast State Community College. The Autism Science Foundation reports that as of 2014, 1 in 68 children in the U.S. has an autism-related disorder. The actual disorder itself may not be becoming more common, but in 2012, the estimate was 1 in 88. Is autism on the rise? We'll meet our guests and start the discussion following these messages. Our guests today, Chris Demas and Melissa Cole, both Mr. Demas and Mrs. Cole.
Going to college was a big decision, but when I graduate from Northeast State, I know I can have a career.
Over half of our employees are graduates of Northeast State Community College.
When we see Northeast State on an application, we always give that candidate a second look.
Our company partners with Northeast State knowing that their students graduate as trained professionals that become our employees both today and into the future.
Discover the career opportunities that await you. Northeast State Community College.
Our guests today, Chris Demas and Melissa Cole, are both Mr. Demas and Mrs. Cole are board members of Autism Society of America in East Tennessee chapter. Today, Direction Northeast will examine the most reported disabilities in our culture, autism. Chris and Melissa, thank you so much for being here. Let's start off with telling you a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name's Chris Demas. I'm Dean of the Library here at Northeast State Community College, and I'm a board member for the East Tennessee chapter of the Autism Society of America. And I have a son who was actually diagnosed with high-functioning autism when he was 2.5, and he's 10 now. Yep.
And Melissa?
I'm also a board member for the Autism Society of East Tennessee. I have a son with autism. He was diagnosed when he was 11, and he is now 20. And I'm also, because of that diagnosis, I've changed my career path, and now I'm a board-certified behavior analyst working with kids with autism and all kinds of disabilities.
Awesome. So what exactly is autism?
Well, autism is a disorder that's neurological and biological. They don't really understand the specific cause of it, but they're doing research, and hopefully we'll be able to have a little window into the cause of autism, hopefully soon in the years ahead. But autism is a wide spectrum of certain behavioral issues that a child is dealing with. Can you expand upon that, Melissa?
They may have social issues where they may not understand social cues, facial cues. They may not understand the way things are supposed to happen. They like to have routines. A lot of them like to have routines. Some of them are verbal, some are nonverbal. Like he was saying, it's a spectrum, autism spectrum disorder. So the spectrum is as wide as it is long, and they can fall anywhere on the spectrum from high functioning, which both of our children are high functioning, which means that they have the functional capabilities similar to a neurotypical kid, but they still have some of the deficits. But then there are the more severely affected children, which may be nonverbal. They may not interact as much and may not be quite as self-aware.
So one of the biggest difficulty with autism is that wide spectrum.
Yeah.
So you have this, it's just this very large bucket, and you have some kids on one side and some kids on the other side, and it's very difficult. It makes it very difficult.
So what are some specific personal challenges you guys have had to face over the years with a child with autism?
Well, I think early on when my son was first diagnosed, the biggest thing was education. Me as a parent learning what the heck is going on, why is he doing certain things, what does this diagnosis mean for now, what does it mean in the future. That was the biggest thing for me. That's why I got connected with the East Tennessee chapter of the Autism Society.
And I had the same issues, as well as trying to find local resources, and I think that's why I went to the Autism Society, because it's the only local resource that we have around here. And then with my son specifically, some of the issues with him especially were behavioral issues. he would be the kind of kid that if someone was playing with blocks next to him, if he thought they were doing it wrong, he would knock it down, and then that would start an altercation, you know? And that would happen like multiple times every day. So that's kind of why I changed my career path, because I saw that this was happening with my son. And once I got involved with the Autism Society and started seeing other parents, and I was like, oh, this is happening with a lot of kids, and there are very few resources here. You know, how can I help others that are in my shoes? So that's kind of the way it happened.
Yeah, and the Autism Society gives us a sense of community, because we're dealing with kind of the same issues. So as parents, we're able to connect and kind of share those issues and share advice and kind of help each other cope with the daily aspects of having a child on the spectrum.
Now, can you walk me through the process of having a child and like getting them screened to diagnosis? How does that process work?
Well, the process usually starts out with the child's pediatrician. If they notice any sort of developmental delays. So for my son, they originally diagnosed him with PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental delay not otherwise specified. So it was kind of a generic thing, but it was an indicator that he was having certain delays. So then you can go to a developmental pediatrician or even a psychologist who can do more specific testing to be able to kind of refine that diagnosis and get a better indication of what might be going on.
With my son, he got the late diagnosis. He was 11 before he got the autism diagnosis. So before that, when he was 3, he had to start daycare, and they were like, oh, he has behavior issues. You know that, right? And I was like, I kind of thought so. So I took him to the pediatrician, and they just diagnosed it as ADHD. And then from then to age 11, he went through several different diagnoses, bipolar, oppositional defiant disorder, obsessive compulsive, just all these different diagnoses and all these different medications. And then when he was 11, someone handed me a book and said, you need to read this. And it was by Temple Grandin, who is a very famous person with autism. And I read it, and I was like, that sounds just like my son. So I took it to the pediatrician, and I was like, could I have him tested? And so we had him tested by 3 different entities, and it was 99.9% sure that he had autism. So that the reason that he was diagnosed so late was because he didn't have any of those delays. He could talk, he had eye contact, he functioned very well other than just his behavioral issues, which were chalked up to ADHD and these other things. So the road can be different for every parent, and that's kind of part of the struggle, is there's no defined way that things work.
So in the Autism Society, did they contact you? Did you find them? How did you get involved in that?
In my case, I found them, and that was the best thing I ever could have done, because they just they gave me that sense of community, as I mentioned before, but then they steered me in the right direction for education, so I could learn exactly what I was dealing with and what my son was dealing with.
And I same thing. I sought them out. Basically just an online search, like looking for resources locally, and they were the only one locally, and I was like, oh, so hey, let's, check them out. And actually the office for that, for the Autism Society is in Knoxville. And there's only one paid employee. She works in Knoxville, and she covers the 36 counties of East Tennessee, so from Chattanooga and Knoxville and all the counties eastward. So Chris and I are volunteer board members in the Tri-Cities, but we actually serve all of the counties of East Tennessee, which is a pretty big territory. So just finding their resources and learning that there are other parents, and then being able to talk to them, and like you said, the sense of community it's huge. When you feel like you're the only one going through this really unusual circumstance, it's really great to find out that you're not the only one.
Yeah, sense of community is very important. And
Yeah.
would you have any advice for someone who might be looking for something like the Autism Society or screening their child?
Well, I would say definitely go on our website, and because we have a list of service providers and resources that they can use, and that's asaetc.org. That would be where I would go first to connect that way. Do you have any other suggestions?
And just so that families know, we also provide all kinds of social outings. So like we rent out like the Kingsport Aquatic Center in the summertime, and it's a private event for our kids so that it's not as overwhelming, because a lot of the kids have sensory issues and things like that. Quantum Leap, the trampoline park in Johnson City, they do an activity for us where they turn off all the machines so it's not so loud, dim the lights. So we collaborate with other community partners to try to make events happen for our families. So that's something that's really important for our kids, because they get that social activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the education is obviously really important, but in order to help that sense of community, as Melissa was talking about, we organize all these events where families can get together and the kids can get together in a safe, nice environment for people on the spectrum, and they can make friends, develop relationships, and just have a great time.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So what are some misconceptions that you found while having a child and learning more about autism yourself?
A lot of people think that we have spoiled kids and that we're bad parents. One instance I can think of is in the grocery store. Like you see a kid having a tantrum at the checkout line because they want candy, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, that's normal. But with our kids, like my son would run away and I couldn't find him, and he would be somewhere else in the store. I can't tell you how many times this happened, and he would just be screaming. And it was, I think it was, I don't know, sensory overload, the lights, the sounds, everything, but he was out of control. He couldn't stand it. He just could not control himself. And so that was not a tantrum, that's a meltdown. So there's a difference. A tantrum is when a child wants something. They're trying to manipulate you. With a meltdown, the child has no control over it, and if you're not used to that and you're in a public place and you see that happening, a lot of people will come up to you and say, as the parent with this child, they will say, well, he needs his butt whooped or something like that, and it's just like, you don't get it, and they think that they give you these horrible stares, and they don't understand what you're going through. So that's one of the biggest hurdles that I've faced, just trying to get the public, and I think that's part of our job is creating awareness. Like if you see that happening, the mom is having a bad time just as much as the kid, because neither one of them are communicating at that point.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest piece that we have, is to educate not only ourselves as parents, but to educate the general public, so that as humans, us all living together, we can all kind of understand what this is, and to create a more accepting environment for the kids.
Now, Melissa, you had mentioned sensory overload. What exactly does that mean, and does that entail?
One of the best ways I've heard it described, these kids just have sensory issues. There's a disorder, sensory processing disorder. It's kind of like where they just can't, there's too much going on and they can't process it all at once. Maybe they have a lower processing speed. But one of the best ways I've heard it described is, imagine yourself in the car in rush hour traffic, and your kids are in the back screaming, and your radio's up all the way, and the windows are up, and your air conditioner's out, and it's 95,000 degrees outside, and there's a fly flying around, and you're stuck in traffic. Now, for me, that would be sensory overload. You've got to at least turn the radio off or roll down the window. Something's got to give. With these kids, they're in that situation, but they don't know to roll the window down or turn the radio down or whatever. They don't have that regulation ability. So that's part of what we teach in some of our classes, how to teach the kids to self-regulate. So maybe get a sensory toy and play with it, a fidget, something to help relieve the pressure, the anxiety. A lot of kids have anxiety because there's so much going on and they can't control it and they don't know how. And so that's the best way I know to describe it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add more to the sensory issue, so Melissa's exactly right, but even more so, there's sensory issues involving like the texture of foods or even clothing. I know my son has a real problem wearing blue jeans because of the way it feels on his skin. So it's a very, very complex problem.
What are some other maybe terms or things that are autism specific that you could help educate the public with, like sensory overload or something like that?
Well, that's the biggest one, I think,
Yeah.
that the child deals with. But as we were saying before, there's like so many pieces to this puzzle that it's really hard to pin down, because every child is different. Even though they have that autism diagnosis, the symptoms that appear can sometimes be just totally different from one another. So as Melissa was talking about how you have some kids who are nonverbal and some kids who are verbal, but it's more complicated than that. So one kid might have a problem with sensory issues. Another kid may have echolalia, which is the repeating of words or phrases that they hear. So it's very, very complex.
Fixations are another thing. A lot of kids will have these fixations. They become, I guess, obsessed with a certain topic. For my son, and it changes over the years, but for my son it started out with Egypt and the pyramids of Egypt, and he wound up knowing everything, and it's like they obsess over it and they want to learn. They want you to teach them everything about this topic, and then it'll change to a different topic. And so the best thing that I can say is be understanding of those topics. That's the only thing they're going to talk about. So if you can, as a teacher, incorporate those topics into your teaching strategies, like for instance, if you have 3 pyramids and 4 pyramids, how many total pyramids do you have? You know, that will get their attention, whereas, you know, other things won't. But the fixations, just understanding that they are part of their life and they probably won't go away, but if you could harness that into a productive thing. For instance, there's a kid I know who's just graduated high school. He has autism and he's obsessed with elevators. And I saw him at the grocery store the other day. He's the checkout boy, the bag boy. And I was like, hey, how are you? And he's like, good. Did you know they have a new elevator over at the blah, blah, blah building? And I was like, oh, no. And he's like, yes, it's an Otis blah, 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 and gave me all the specs and everything. But his family is hoping to encourage that and use that and get him to be an elevator repairman. That's what he wants to do. So that's using that fixation, which is a totally normal part of autism, and, you know, channeling it into a positive thing.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And Melissa had mentioned earlier about having, you know, other people judge you or misconstrued what is happening. Have you ever had any instance like that?
I don't know if I have. I'm sure I maybe have had an instance like that, but I can't recall one because a lot of the people I hang out with are these guys. From but no, I'm sure you might have an example.
Oh, I have a lot of stories, but that's the good thing about having the community. Like when we go to these events, you know, it's other parents, and I mean, I have stepped over a child having a meltdown because they were right there. You know, we were at Bays Mountain Park,
Yeah.
remember? And all these kids, and one just happened to be having a meltdown, and there was no other way, and I didn't, you know, it wasn't bothering me. I understood, so I just kind of stepped over him and kept going. And that's the kind of environment that we hope to create. And, you know, these kids, they're having a hard time. We don't need to make the families feel even more segregated.
Yeah.
You know?
And it is Autism Awareness Month. What are some highlights that you guys would want to share with the public about awareness and understanding?
Well, during Autism Awareness Month every year, we have a conference in Johnson City, and it's an educational conference. So the audience is basically parents, educators, and professionals like doctors and psychologists, things like that. And so we just had ours at the beginning of the month, and it was fantastic. I think we had over 120 people there, and we had guest speakers, different breakout sessions, all about learning about autism and specific strategies of how to deal with it and how to help. That's really one of our big things, and I enjoy that every single year.
Yeah. We do a lot of activities in April. We had Rev Racing, which is a racing crew that comes to Bristol every year. They have reached out to us. This is the 3rd year they've done it, and they give us some tickets. Their whole mission is diversity, and so they have female drivers, the first driver with autism, just all kinds of diverse drivers. And they reached out to us a few years ago and were like, hey, we would like to invite your kids to come and meet our drivers and get in the cars and give them tickets to the race. And we were like, oh, thank you. So they're still doing that, and we did it again this year, and it's just wonderful. We get to, we open it up to new families every year, and the kids just love it. It's usually on the news. The kids are just wide-eyed and so excited. And so, you know, that creates awareness, and that puts us in a totally different realm. That's the Bristol Motor Speedway. That's a huge facility, and different, you know, I mean, it's just, we try any way we can. We try to get in front of the public and just talk about autism, what it is, some things you might see, and just to try to be accepting, not just aware, but also accepting of these kids. And adults, because these kids grow up. You know, my son's 20 now, so, and that's another thing. We serve families, you know, with kids 0 to 100. We don't discriminate, and so we have support groups for all ages, and we just have all kinds of stuff for families. We just really encourage families to visit our website and check out what we have, and we try to make everything as accessible as possible.
Absolutely. And so in this community and throughout everything, learning about autism and joining the Autism Society here in Tennessee, do you guys feel that autism is on the rise in these past few years?
I do. Yesterday, I think the CDC released kind of new numbers for autism, and now they're saying 1 in 59. So it is definitely on the rise. So imagine 1 out of every 59 children diagnosed with autism. So that means they're going to be in your school, they're going to be in your community, churches, they're going to be everywhere. So that's why it's so vital that the message is sent, the educational message of having people understand and be accepting.
We ran into a statistic also where it stated that 1 in 59 now children have autism. That's more than the children that are affected by, and I hope I get this right, cancer, juvenile diabetes, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, AIDS, and there's one more, I can't remember, but there were 7 different conditions. So there are more children affected by autism than all of those combined, which is just enormous. It's hard to believe. So it's really a big deal.
Do you feel like this number is expanding because of the wide spectrum, that it includes different things, or do you feel like it's because understanding is growing?
I think it's both. I think the diagnosis and detection is becoming a lot better. So the doctors are more informed, parents are more informed, and they're able to spot these things early on and make a clear diagnosis. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Fantastic. So do you guys have any final words that you would like to share, or any new events coming up that people would be interested in going to?
We have a tremendous amount of events already planned. If you go to the website asaetc.org and you click on event calendar, parents will be able to see all of that.
So Chris, starting with you, what do you see in the future for you and your child and working with the Autism Society?
I think as my son gets older and older, the issues become different, which is typical for any child, growing. So with the Autism Society, it's important for me as a parent to connect with parents who have older children, so I can understand better the things that I may be facing in the future. So that's really important.
So how do you feel about the future and opening up, and about how the understanding?
The future is very bright. I think the message is really getting out there across the U.S. We have the American Society, the Autism Society of America is fantastic. It's nationwide. And then you have organizations like Autism Speaks. So the message is really getting out there, and I think the future is very, very bright.
And Melissa, how do you feel about the future?
I agree. I think it's, we're learning more, and so we're able to fill the needs more, and it's just a lot more attention is being paid to it. So I think it's just got to get better.
And how do you feel your child feels about the future? Do they have an understanding of their future is just as bright, and they're going to look and help encourage that understanding?
I think so. I really do. Of course, my son will be going to college here at Northeast State, so I've been able to influence him, and he's only 10, but you have these conversations early, right? And that's been a good help. But he's doing great in school. I'm just so very, very proud of him. He's a good boy.
And how about your son?
Yeah, I think that right now he's trying to find his niche, just like any 20-year-old, and I think that once we get into the swing of things, he'll be able to be productive and feel like he's a good functioning part of society, just like anybody else, and I hope that he feels accepted too.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And as Melissa had mentioned earlier, the Autism Society is for everybody. How would someone, besides going to the website, get into that and feel included? And you said that it's for everybody. Is there any other regulations or How is the process of them getting into the society?
They just show up.
Just show up?
We don't, we're the Autism Society of East Tennessee, but we're one of the only organizations locally at all. So we have families that come from Virginia and North Carolina and even Kentucky to some of our events, and we don't check IDs. They just tell us, you know, that's how we know. But that's fine. We don't care. And we're all inclusive. So if a child wants to come and they don't have autism, but they have some other disability or some other ability, we're all inclusive. We don't care. We want everyone to enjoy these sensory-friendly activities that we offer, and it's really good for our kids to interact with all kinds. So, we're very inclusive. All they have to do is just show up.
Fantastic. Yeah, the sense of community is very apparent, and you guys seem very passionate, and I'm sure the future is absolutely bright. So, do you guys have any feelings or specific memories that you'd like to share about going through the whole process of your child from birth to today, starting to college and being a young 10-year-old?
I think for me, the hardest thing was the fear, because you're like, oh, what do I do with this? But the fear is just based on a lack of understanding on my part at that time. And of course then educating myself about the disorder was huge for me, so that I could think more positively about it and see the great things that could come in the future from my son.
And how about you, Melissa?
The same thing. I mean, just the process of learning, it's taken this long for me to understand what I know now, and there's so much more to even learn. So it's a learning process for everyone involved, not just for me, but also for the teachers and for the church groups and everybody. It's just, memory-wise, it's just a lot of learning, basically, and adapting and being flexible, because we have to be flexible. They can't. So.
Yeah.
So, do you have any final thoughts and words on the autism or the Autism Society that you'd like to share?
Well, I would like to say that autism is around us everywhere, and the numbers are increasing. And so it's just, again, it's important for us as human beings to get together and to just be as understanding as possible, so that we can respect each other and acknowledge the dignity of every human being.
Fantastic. And Chris and Melissa, thank you so much for coming today and talking about the Autism Society and your personal experiences.
Thank
you
you
so much. And thank you. And we'll be back in just a moment to wrap up Direction Northeast.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a wife, a mother, and a student pursuing my dreams.
I came back to school with a passion to help people.
Came back to Northeast State to study electromechanical, because I like working with my hands.
To be a producer. At 64, I'm a student and an entrepreneur.
Wherever you are and whenever you're going, we are here to get you there at Northeast State.
That concludes the program for today. We talked with Chris Demas and Melissa Cole, board members of the Autism Society of America, the East Tennessee chapter. Community is very important to the students at Northeast State Community College, and this program takes a look at the few of the subjects that they find important. Until we meet next time, on behalf of the students, staff, and faculty of Northeast State Community College, I'm Madison Phillips, and this is Direction Northeast.